7.1 magnitude earthquake rocking Venezuela and separate quakes reported in California and Japan. I want to show you some of the video. We are just now getting into it. These chaotic moments on the streets of Caracas, dust filling the air after the capital there in Venezuela felt that intense shaking. You see people walking around, some of them looking confused. A baseball game coming to a halt, people running for safety. You see the light fixture up there swaying, people running for safety to the center of the field. Just hours before that, we saw a 5.6 quake hitting Northern California, knocking shelves of food to the ground. We're also following a 6.9 quake in Japan with tsunami advisories in effect there. There's a lot going on, lot to watch. We've got Bill Karen standing by. But I want to start with Aaron Gilchrist joining us now because it seems that the most significant of these is the one that just happened late today in Venezuela. Aaron, what do we know about the possibility of any injuries, about how people are doing there?
Yeah, less than an hour ago this happened, Hallie, and at this point there aren't any reports about any serious injuries or any major damage having happened here, but obviously a 7.1 magnitude earthquake is a major earthquake, and this was one that happened a little after 6 o'clock Eastern time, apparently in the northwestern part of Venezuela, so putting it very much near the coast of Venezuela, the Caribbean coast of Venezuela. There are reports that there could have been some of the shaking felt in parts of Colombia, and as you've been saying, this video that we're seeing now out of the Caracas area, which is more than 100 miles away from where we believe the epicenter of this earthquake was, and still we see the shaking. You see people who felt that shaking running into the streets, getting reports about buildings with cracks potentially in some of these buildings. We've been hearing reports about bottles being knocked off of shelves in stores in this area, and obviously people very much concerned about their safety, running into the streets, trying to get to safe spaces, potentially to open spaces in case there were any buildings that might collapse. And again, at this point, an hour after this earthquake happened, we are not getting any reports about any buildings that have collapsed or seen any major damage or any reports about people having been injured. Hallie, there are alerts that have been posted by the National Weather Service in this country about the potential for tsunamis in this area. An earthquake of this magnitude near the coast could potentially send waves to neighboring islands into the Caribbean Netherlands, into Aruba. There are reports about advisories.
Two powerful earthquakes have struck Venezuela, leveling buildings in the capital. The first foreshock measured a magnitude of 7.2 at a depth of 22 kilometers. The second main shock was much stronger and more shallow, registering 7.5 magnitude at a depth of 10 kilometers. Now, the two earthquakes struck just 39 seconds apart. The U.S. Geological Survey has warned that there could be a high number of casualties and also extensive damage. Let's bring in Teresa Bo, who joins us live from Bogota in neighboring Colombia. Teresa, what can you tell us about these two earthquakes?
Well, certainly, there were two earthquakes mostly happening in central Venezuela. One of them was 7.2 in the area of San Felipe, and the second one in Yumare. That's all located in central Venezuela. Apparently, it was also felt in some areas here across Colombia. There was a tsunami alert issued shortly after. What we can tell you is the images that we're seeing that are coming out of Venezuela. People terrified at the airport in Maiquetía. People running and trying to hide their children, lots of destruction inside the airport. Then in the area of Altamira, for example, in Caracas, where several buildings apparently collapsed. That's an area that's filled with restaurants and businesses, among other things. And there was also videos of an area in Maracay also with lots of destruction in those locations. I was just talking to someone in Caracas who was telling me that there could be lots of casualties because mostly this is the time when people go back to their homes, so there could be people trapped under the rubble. However, the government until now has not confirmed exactly what is going on. We do know that the Minister of Interior, Diosdado Cabello, has confirmed that some buildings have collapsed, and they're also asking people to remain outside of their buildings because of the risks that it means of going back inside and back to their homes. Also, lots of people just standing and sitting outside on the streets, afraid to go back inside because there could be aftershocks, and that's why for now they're remaining outside of those buildings.
Teresa, these images that we're showing are from Caracas, the capital, but do you know of any injuries or damages there in the region where this actually struck, this region which is west of Caracas?
Well, it's important to know that around 80% of Venezuela's population is located in seismic areas. So it's not clear yet how far it has reached and how much damage has been caused because of this. We know that there's images coming out of an area like Maracay, for example, or people closer to the beach, also in Caracas. But that's the information that we have so far. The government has not exactly said how much money has been cost until now. It's interesting to know that Venezuela has a strict building code, anti-seismic building code. However, there's many of these buildings that have collapsed, are old, and also many of the people in the country live in very poor location, in very poor areas where the buildings are extremely vulnerable. So, we cannot say right now how much damage or what has happened exactly there, but certainly these earthquakes, they were strong. This has not happened in many years. The latest large earthquake happened back in 1967. Then there was another one in 2024, another one last year. And apparently, President Nicolás Maduro at that time had carried out some drills to be prepared for the country, to be prepared in case something like this happened. He's currently detained in the United States. But certainly, we're waiting to hear more information, especially from the government, to find out exactly how much damage these two earthquakes have caused.
Teresa, we know that it's also people in neighboring Colombia felt some of the tremors from these earthquakes. What are some of the personal stories that you're hearing now from people being very afraid, of course, having to leave their homes, going out into the street to make sure that they don't end up under any collapsing buildings? What are you hearing?
Well, people here are used to some type of smaller earthquakes happening, so they are prepared in a way to cope with situations such as this one. And for now, for what I am told, it was not felt strongly here in Bogota or in other areas. We're still trying to locate and talk to other people across the country to find out exactly what happened. But the information that we have right now is that most of the damage, most of the fear of what is happening right now is happening in Venezuela, where apparently, and because of the images that we're seeing, there could be a huge damage, not only in the buildings and not only in the capital, but also across the country.
That is Al Jazeera's Teresa Bo reporting live from Bogota in neighboring Colombia. Thank you so much, Teresa.
First in this developing news from Caracas, we have live pictures coming into us. We can see here rescue crews. They are working through the night. They're trying to find survivors after those two successive earthquakes devastated Venezuela's capital. There were 7.5 and 7.2 magnitude earthquakes, and they happened within the space of a minute. They rocked the city in scenes that residents say was reminiscent of a horror movie. Venezuela has activated an emergency declaration, shutting schools and hospitals. Authorities have just provided an update. They've put the death toll at 37 for the time being. There are fears, though, that number could climb into the tens of thousands.
A frantic search for survivors in Venezuela's capital. Rescuers scrambling through rubble where buildings once stood. As darkness blankets Caracas, families gather in the streets, desperate and searching for answers.
When we went downstairs, the scene was like a horror movie. We had to climb over the rubble and everything.
The building moved from side to side because it was incredible.
Several walls in the area collapsed, and it was really strong. We're expecting some aftershocks.
The first earthquake, initially measured at magnitude 7.2, struck shortly after 6 o'clock on Wednesday evening, local time. Its epicentre, west of the city of Morón, around 168 kilometres from Caracas. Less than a minute later, a second and more powerful magnitude 7.5 tremor hit. Smoke was seen rising above the skyline, buildings swaying across the capital. At Simón Bolívar International Airport, just north of Caracas, travellers ran for cover as the ceiling gave way. Smoke and debris quickly filled the terminal. The airport has since been shut down. Many Venezuelans were at home enjoying a public holiday when the ground suddenly began to shake. Authorities fear mass casualties. A tsunami warning was briefly issued for parts of the Caribbean before being lifted. The earthquakes are among the strongest to strike Venezuela in more than a century. The tremors so powerful, they were felt across several states. A country shaken in seconds, now facing a long stretch of fear, rubble and uncertainty.
I want to bring in William Barnhart, who is from the United States Geological Survey. He joins us now on the line. William, thanks so much for your time. Talk us through what you saw in your charts.
Yeah, this is a situation of two really potentially devastating earthquakes, magnitude 7.2 and a 7.5. They only occurred about 39 seconds apart from each other. So that's a really rapid succession of seismic events. That 7.5 is about 3 times more powerful than the 7.2. And perhaps more importantly, this is a large earthquake that happened very close to some very dense population centers. So the early indications are that there's fairly substantial damage from this earthquake. The USGS assesses that there's potentially catastrophic human loss of life and damage from this, and that it's likely a very widespread damaging set of earthquakes.
William, how do you come to those evaluations, if you like, of how widespread the damage would be? And I saw one quote from the USGS saying that the number of people who die in this could potentially be up to 100,000. How do you get to those figures?
The first thing that we do is we consider the location and the magnitude of the earthquake, so how big the earthquake was. And from that, we can derive an estimate of the shaking, how strong the shaking was, and where the shaking occurred, over what land area did the shaking happen. Finally, what we do is we overlay that shaking on the population and what we know about the building styles and the time of day when the earthquake happened. And that gives us an assessment, a probabilistic assessment of potentially how many casualties there are and what the economic losses are. The numbers are fairly broad because there are a lot of factors that go into the specific casualty toll of an earthquake. So they're estimated sort of by a factor of 10 estimate. But the key thing is that those assessments tell us and tell first responders and world governments that this is a very serious situation and one with potentially enormous impacts for the country of Venezuela and the region around it.
And William, as you said, the pictures that we're all seeing are coming out of Caracas, which is the capital, which is where all the TV crews will be. But this area, 168 kilometres on the country's Caribbean coast, which was the epicenter, would you expect there to be near on complete destruction there?
It's hard to say what the destruction would be, but certainly we expect that there to be much stronger and much worse destruction closer to the earthquake in places like San Felipe or St. Felipe. and towns that are very close to the source region of this earthquake. The fact that we're seeing this damage in Caracas, which is so much further away from the earthquake, tells us that there likely is very, very bad damage much closer to the earthquake. But given the difficulty of accessing those areas because of that damage, it may be some time before that's fully realized.
William, what is Venezuela's history with earthquakes? Are they used to anything like this?
In some ways, Venezuela sits on an active plate boundary, so earthquakes are common there. Magnitude 7 and larger earthquakes like this onshore are actually fairly rare, though. In fact, the USGS doesn't have any documented cases of magnitude 7 or larger earthquakes within mainland Venezuela in the past century. But more recent, sort of more moderate magnitude earthquakes in the magnitude 6 range have caused, albeit very localized, but substantial damage. There was an earthquake in the 1960s, a magnitude 6.6 earthquake in Caracas that led to hundreds of fatalities. A large contributing factor to those fatalities are the building styles in the region. The fact that there are many unreinforced buildings that are not capable of withstanding the strong shaking for an earthquake.
Is it possible to gauge at this early stage, William, how widespread the quake was felt, the scale of it across this country?
There is, and from what our initial assessment looks like, most of northern Venezuela and regions in nearby Colombia and Suriname would have likely felt this earthquake. Islands in the Caribbean would have felt this earthquake. It would have been felt over a very broad region. Our initial assessments indicate that around 8 million people were subjected to strong to violent levels of shaking. So those are levels of shaking that can cause building damage and cause infrastructure damage. So that's a very substantial population that was exposed to very, very violent shaking during this earthquake.
And there was tsunami alerts issued. Have they been rescinded now?
Yeah, those have been rescinded. The style of earthquake that occurred here, one, it was both onshore, which is good for the tsunami scenario, and then the style of faulting is not normally conducive to tsunamis. So once that information was sorted out to an appropriate level, those tsunami advisories in the Caribbean were rescinded.
People are being urged to remain outside as aftershocks could further damage structures. Are you seeing any of that yet? Has there been registers of aftershocks?
We've been able to see that there are aftershocks happening. So far, there hasn't been many large aftershocks. However, the chances of there being a magnitude 5 or larger aftershock in the next week are almost 100%. Magnitude 6 or larger earthquake is about 40% in the next week. And then the really bad scenario of another magnitude 7 or larger earthquake is about a 5% chance in the next week. Those probabilities will decrease with time, but certainly these earthquakes will be followed by aftershocks. And some of those aftershocks might have strong shaking that people will feel and that could cause further damage to local buildings.
William, how unusual is it to get 2 strong earthquakes back to back like that? As you said, within 39 seconds. Do you consider them both the same, or was the second one an aftershock, even though it was bigger?
They're 2 distinct earthquakes. In this case, we would call the smaller first one a foreshock that led to the main shock. It's not a common scenario, but it does happen. A really famous example was the earthquakes in Turkey in 2023. There was about 6 or so hours between those earthquakes, but it was sort of a similar scenario where you had 2 similarly sized earthquakes in close proximity to each other. It's not the norm, but it's also not necessarily uncommon either.
And does the depth of these quakes, the first one, I believe, 22 kilometres, the second one, 16, does the depth have an impact on how much damage we're likely to see?
Absolutely. Shallower earthquakes, they are felt over a smaller region. However, they have much stronger shaking than a much deeper earthquake. So a lot of the damage that is going to come out from this earthquake is going to be due in part to the shallow nature of the earthquake itself.
Right, so I was going to ask, excuse my ignorance, but a quake that's only 16 kilometres deep, that is considered very shallow?
Yeah, as opposed to an earthquake that's, say, 100 kilometres deep.
And you talked briefly about it, but the difference between an earthquake actually striking on land was quite close to the coast, wasn't it?